Right, good evening everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Housing and Environment Ofcom. Just for the benefit of the members of the public at the back, we have two papers tonight. We have obviously councillors on each side, and then we have officers here as well. Have an officer from HCC and Borough Council officers as well. I'll just run very quickly through some of the agenda. This is a continuation meeting of the meeting we had 2 weeks ago. So, for example, we don't have minutes from previous meetings, so I'll just run very quickly through. First of all, fire evacuation. We're not expecting any fire alarms, so therefore if the fire alarm does sound, please evacuate the building. You can see the fire exits behind me. We go down the stairs and out into the War Memorial Park. Webcasting of meeting, I believe we're being webcast. Apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Day, Councillor Baker, and that's it. Councillor Bierman is with us. Indeed you are, yes. And resignations and replacements, we have Councillor Marks this evening is being replaced by Councillor Paul Miller, Councillor Mrs Still by Councillor Sherlock, and Councillor Mrs Waldridge by Councillor Keating. So welcome everybody. Councillor James.
Thank you. Sorry. If it's a continuation of a meeting, can you have substitutes? I didn't know that was possible.
I understand that we can, but I'll just check with the officers to be done. Yes, I'm informed that if we were partly way through a paper, we wouldn't be able to, but because we're moving on to new papers, then we're fine. Thank you. Councillor Keating.
I think that's wrong information that you've been provided, and I wish to record my objection to that decision.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Keating.
Thank
That's
you.
noted. Thank you. Thank you. Urgent items, there are none as far as I understand. Obviously no minutes because this is a continuation meeting. Member and public participation, we do have a number of members of the public listed to speak. We have one visiting councillor, I believe, Councillor Harvey on paper B, who I believe is here. Yes, there he is in the corner there. And then I believe the rest of the speakers are for paper D. Standing invitation to portfolio holders, we do have Councillor Ossleton with us this evening. We have no we have no referrals from other committees, so we can move straight on, I think. Our first paper that we're taking tonight is originally paper B. I must thank, first of all, our officer from HCC, Sue Piddock, who has come along and who did come for us for the last meeting, so I'm very grateful to coming back. And before we commence, can I also thank all the members of the public who were here last time who've come back as well for a second time, mostly I believe on paper D. So for paper B, we'll have a presentation and then we'll move on to questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Sue Piddock. I'm the local area director for North Hampshire for older people and physical disability, and you've invited me to come and talk about social care services in the home in Basingstoke and Deane. I have got a few slides with some facts and figures, and then obviously I'm more than happy to answer questions after that. I think the first thing to say is that we do support significant numbers of people at home in Basingstoke and Deane, some very frail and vulnerable people, particularly elderly people, and we are really committed to keeping people as supporting them to stay at home as long as possible where it's appropriate. Last year we had supported 1,400 people with a personal budget on an ongoing basis. We also had services delivered, this is all from the County Council, for about another 500 people for short-term care, for instance after hospital admission, illness, or perhaps one of their carer was poorly. So an additional service of a short-term nature. And the annual expenditure for these services is around, well, it's over 5 million at present in the area. The services are all delivered now. County Council's preferred way of delivering home support services is through personal budgets. I don't know if people have heard this term bandied about. People can have a personal budget. What that really means is once you've met the eligibility criteria for care, for support, you will be told how much money your care is costing, and you have a choice of having services directly commissioned through us, or having a bank account set up and having a direct payment. So more and more people do that. This has been in place since 2007, that you can really have choice over your services. Whilst you can still have the council services, if you want, you can choose to go out and employ your own carers, and we monitor and audit the expenditure on an annual basis. So there really is a lot more choice now. The range of services, I'm just going to show these. There are quite a range of services that we provide. I think before we get on to the heavier dependency services, we do have in the area, we do have a community independence team, which is really, I think, is quite good for Hampshire. I've only been working in Hampshire for 18 months myself, and I hadn't come across this before. It's a nice little team of occupational therapists, advisors, people who can go and see people, elderly people, people with disabilities who are struggling but don't necessarily have any services as yet, and they can give all sorts of signposting advice. They link people into exercise classes, get them on the fast track for equipment services in the home, tell them about clubs that are going on, etc., link with other sort of council services, really. And their main aim is to really support people to remain independent. So we really are trying to support people before they need the higher end services. We then just referred to our domiciliary care. We provided that I've just mentioned. We also have free crisis care, and our main care is means tested. But we do have, if people have a crisis or short-term need for home care, then it's free for up to 6 weeks. But longer term, it is means tested. I can answer any questions about that if they come up. Other range of services, support work, that is about helping people managing bills and that type of thing. Direct payments I've mentioned. Carers support. We do a significant amount of support in the form of a service called Take a Break, which I don't know if anybody's heard of, but it's a really useful service for people who are looking after somebody. And we have got large numbers of people now who are looking after perhaps a partner with dementia or something like that, who can't actually leave them at home on their own. They may not want, full home care services, but would just like to get out and about. And they can have the Take a Break service, which isn't chargeable. Our carer services are not chargeable, and have anything up to 4 hours a week break with a domiciliary care agency coming in to sit with the person and do activities with them, and that service can be more flexible. You can choose when you want it and have perhaps a whole day out once a month instead, something like that. Equipment, we do a large range of equipment, and in fact in the numbers I gave you we didn't include that because I think we have about 6,500 people in Basingstoke-on-Deane get some form of equipment from our equipment service, and we try and track it all, because things like walking frames and raised loo seats and things, we issue them out, we track them and try and have them recycled, and I think we've currently got about 15,000 items out in the community at the moment, all being used. Finally, telecare. I'm sure people will have heard a lot about telecare, and different views on it. We are having more sophisticated telecare now. We've got a telecare team back at Winchester, which is coming up with some quite innovative sort of sensors and stuff to help people at home. And really that does benefit carers, particularly by having monitoring devices, buddy systems, where, say, if a person has dementia, they can go off for a walk with a little tracking device, and then if they get lost, they can be rescued. And we really have it. We're trying to think of services now for people who are probably more active than in the past. We're seeing a new group of people, particularly around dementia, who are, in the sort of 60s and 70s, who need the sort of different type of services. So those are just a quick look at some of our services. We do have, I don't know if you can see that chart, you might not see it at the back, but we can say that we've had a really significant growth in the amount of home care service we provide. 30% increase in the numbers of people receiving domiciliary service in Basingstoke-on-Deane over the last 5 years, and that really is quite marked. If we look at the next chart, I don't know how well people can see that, but I can tell you the top two lines are the top line is the over 85s, and we've had a 60% increase in the number of people aged over 85 who are receiving home care support from us now, and a similar increase in the numbers of 75s to 84s. And I think it just shows the population, the demographics is really what it shows. I think the younger age groups not so much, but that's quite a really significant increase, particularly on the over 85s plus. We find a lot of people are managing very well, and suddenly unfortunately have a fall or something very independent and suddenly need help in their 90s or even later. So that's a big change. Comparisons with the rest of the county, I thought that might be useful for people. We do have more people comparatively being supported at home in North Hampshire than the rest of the county. Our care is more expensive in this area than the rest of the county. I think it's really a case of the markets, the fact that the domiciliary care market is challenging in that it is quite difficult to recruit carers. So with low unemployment, it's not as easy as say it is on the south coast, and we do pay more to our domiciliary care agencies up in this area. The last point I've already mentioned about equipment. There's the figures there. We do issue more equipment in this area, probably linked to the fact that we're supporting more people at home. I was just going to mention a little bit about our new developments coming up. We are across the country. I think know that there's a big move for adult services and social care to work closely with the health service, much more closely, so that we're not duplicating services and making sure that we're joining up for patients and people so that they have consistent services. We're developing integrated care teams in the North Hampshire CCG. We've got 6 of those. We're also looking at our links with the border CCGs in the area, because North Hampshire CCG doesn't cover the whole district, so we're looking closely at that as well. And next year across the country there'll be, I think people have heard of the Integration Transformation Fund, it's called, which will be funding that's coming out of the hospitals, the acute sector, across to adult services, really to try and turn round the big drive towards acute services and try and support people at home more. So we're just going to wait and see how that affects us, but it isn't new funding, it's going to be money coming out of the existing clinical commissioning groups. Thirdly, there's a new integrated assessment service at the hospital underway, where we'll have joint social workers and therapists, etc., linked to A&E to try and support people who may come in with a fall or something but could go home without having to be admitted into hospital with extra services. So that'll be developing. Finally, just on the sort of larger scale, we've got the Care Bill, which is going to change the social services landscape in 2015. That's going through Parliament at the moment. And it's mentioned carers earlier. They will have a right to services. At the moment, carers only have a right to assessment. In future, they'll have a right to services once they've been assessed. So we think we're going to see a lot more people asking for care support, which will be interesting. There'll be new eligibility criteria, which will probably be a bit wider. So we will be responsible probably for more services. And then there also people will be able to have care accounts. So if they spend money themselves on their personal care and social care, they will only have to spend a certain amount before we will pick them up. So we're just looking at the implications of that. So that really, I think, is a sort of whistle-stop tour of the home care services. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, thank you. Before we move on, just a couple of things. In my haste, committee, to move on with the agenda, I think I didn't ask if anyone has any declarations of interest. So, Councillor James.
My father, it's an interest in my father has received care from social services.
Would the committee be happy if Councillor Peach serves as Vice Chair for this evening? Is everyone happy with that? Thank you. Thank you. Right, shall we go first of all to Councillor Harvey? Councillor Harvey, are you happy to come up? Councillor Harvey, you have 2 minutes, if that's fine.
Thank you, Chair. Committee, I wanted to leave you with some thoughts this evening on this really important subject. And it also is interesting that it flows on from your previous debate around D-side, and I think the issues overlap quite importantly. There are some very serious concerns, I think, at the moment with the standard of care, the level of care, and the way that people are being passported between agencies and different services. And in that sense, the cuts to social care are a concern, very serious concern. £25 million being cut from the budget, 400 jobs lost, 60 of them are residential carers and daycare centre staff that have been lost, and a further £80 million that is projected to be cut from the budget between now and 2015. All of that creates an environment that is very difficult to deliver the kinds of services that we're talking about here. And just to think about your presentation from Dr. Freeman for a moment, from the CCJ, and his idea of transferring to independent living, this idea of moving development away from hospital to home support, is all well and good, providing the money is there, and that is a really serious point. In terms of 50-minute times to take to look to people, to look after people in terms of going into a home and providing a service, that I think is an issue, because the consistency of that and the quality of that is something I think that needs to be examined and looked at. And it's also fair to say that the carers are an important part of this, and those in many cases are being exploited by their agencies, and the issues in terms of the cuts, they're being passed on to the providers, and we're seeing many of those carers, in terms of recruitment and retention of them, become incredibly difficult because of the conditions of their employment and the conditions of work they're made to work under. And when we look to the future of residential care, a couple of points I'd like to make on that quickly relate to residential care and the concern reflected in D-side. And it's all well and good to drive for extra care, to push for extra care. Of course, that's got a part to play. But that doesn't mean, when we're facing such a dramatic increase in the size of our population with dementia in Basingstoke and the size of the growth of the elderly population in Basingstoke over 65, that we don't need residential care, well thought through, well maintained places like D-side that have a role to play. And I would not want county to lose sight of that. So in leaving you, Chair, could I just leave you with a comment from one of my county council colleagues, happens to be a Conservative county council colleague, who said to me that we've cut past the flesh, we are now cutting into the bone. We cannot cut more without seriously affecting the services we deliver to our residents. If that's from a Conservative member of the county council, I think that speaks volumes.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Thank you. Yeah, fine, thank you. Before we actually move on to questions from committee, I think it'd be really helpful this evening if we could aim perhaps to finish before standing orders, if committee's happy with that, bearing in mind that we've had public return tonight, having sat through quite a lengthy meeting before, and officers.
Are you saying we should all agenda items by 9:30, or just this one?
I was hoping for both, if possible, Councillor Keating. Obviously, we'll see how we go, but I think it'd be nice if we could, just for the benefit of the public, as well as the officers who've had to return, try to aim for that. So therefore, to begin with, I wonder if I could have an indication of how many people have questions at this moment. So we have 3 people with questions. Okay, can we start off perhaps with 2 questions from each, and then we'll go around again if necessary. Thank you. So first hand, I believe, was Councillor Keating.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions. Your slides led me to believe that you were, on one occasion, dealing with home-based adult services, whereas a later slide led me to think you were talking about all of social services adult, which would include residential, etc., etc. So could you just clarify that? Because you quoted 5.3 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I am talking about services that people receive in their own homes, that it may be more than just domiciliary home care. So telecare services, that budget is just services in the home.
The second question, Chair, is in relation to your slide which identified the increasing demand. There seemed to be a drop-off or a reduction in the increase, if you understand what I'm saying, from 2011 to now. It seemed to have increased substantially and then dropped off. Now the question is, does that accord with the latest evidence which suggests that by 2015 there will be a further significant increase? Thank you.
I think what we have seen is a little levelling out of the increase, but at the same time we have people who have more complex needs. I think when I showed the slide of the over 85s and older people, we are seeing perhaps not a massive increase, and it really is going to be a crystal ball thing about how it is in the future, because people are generally fitter for longer. And I think it's just a case that people will be fitter for longer, but they'll need that care. There are more people with long-term conditions just at the sort of last few years of life, if you like. So I think we may not be delivering huge extra numbers of care, but we will certainly be delivering more complex care, bigger packages. We are certainly seeing, with people being discharged from hospital now, a large number of people need 4 calls a day, double up care. You know, they really need a high level of care, and we wouldn't have seen that, say, 5 years ago. So in terms of the numbers, we're not really sure yet, you know, but obviously we are trying to make sure we put in as many preventative services and support to people as possible, but the sheer population bulge will mean that, you know, we certainly won't have a reduction in numbers.
Thank you. Councillor James.
I've got lots of questions, but I'll start with 2 then. The reason I wanted the county to come and present to us, because at the presentation we had from the clinical commissioning group, Dr. Freeman, when we signed off the health strategy, he talked about a move, which you've talked about in your presentation, away from hospital to keeping people in their own home, and he was talking about that no one would go into hospital unless you had a broken leg. That's what he sort of quoted. But he talked about his budget being cut, and gave us the figures on that. And I just want to know, in relation to capacity, because you've made there were cuts last year in relation to this, which was 25 million, and then we're looking at next year the projection being 18 million, and I guess that will be another 25 for adult social care. First question is, how are you going to, and you said in your presentation, there's no new money for this new move. How are we going to cope against, and it's going to just add on a bit more here in relation to the question. We've got an ageing population in Basingstoke. We've got a 17% increase in people with dementia. We've also got 83% of the borough's population regularly provide unpaid care, and 16% of whom provide care for up to 50 hours. And you're saying that under the new care bill, they will now have a right to services. How is this going to be funded in the future? Is there going to be capacity to fund this?
Thank you. It's a good question, and I think it's a national issue with our ageing population. I mean, I think I can say that we haven't cut domiciliary care services out of that funding. That increase in numbers has been tracked by an increase in budget. Budget coming off other areas, trying to be more efficient, really. We don't, for instance, have quite the amount of day services that we did in the past. People, are perhaps preferring to be at home and going out, choosing what they go out to do in terms of clubs. So we haven't actually cut domiciliary care budgets over that period. Obviously the landscape financially is challenging going forward, and I think it's all about doing it more efficiently. We will have to work much closer with the health service. I think that's going to be the key thing, and it's a similar situation, or as you said, from Dr. Freeman. I think the aim of this integration transformation fund is to make adult services, social services work better together with health service. I mean, when you think health service has a rapid response service that provides some care, we have our services that provide care. Can we put them together and make them more efficient in the future? I mean, I think we're going to have to work really hard to do everything we can to support people to keep going. And I think going forward, the early intervention work is also very important, to make sure that people are able to stay active and, eat well. That type of thing is going to be really important in future to help us all and make sure we don't, unfortunately have to end up in hospital. It is going to be challenging, but no budgets for domiciliary care have been cut as yet.
In a sense, it doesn't really answer my question, because the reality is in Basingstoke we have 11.7% higher than the national average of older people. So you talked about a national average. I mean, ours is higher than that, and this bulging older person that's coming down the line in Basingstoke, and we've at the same time, by 2015, we're going to have a 17% increase in people with dementia. That's higher than the national average. And you talked about efficiency in what we've got to do, but you did, and I'd like to explore that a bit more with you as to what you mean by that, because though you're saying that you didn't cut the domiciliary budget, what you did do though is the council has also saved £4.9 million in 2011-12 by driving down the price they pay to agencies to provide the care. So you didn't cut the budget, but what you did, you cut the budget that you give to agencies that deliver the care. And then you're saying that we're having trouble actually recruiting carers in Basingstoke. And I just would like to know if you could talk to us about that cut in that budget that you did, and is that what you mean by efficiency? It's actually paying carers less to do the job.
In terms of efficiencies, I'm talking about internal efficiencies within the county council. We are, for instance, there will be a new integrated business centre, so that every part of the council is not doing its own HR, its own finance support, that type of thing. That is coming in, and that is going to save funds. We are looking internally. I wasn't in post here at the time of the 4.9 million cut. I mean, so I can't say the exact detail of what that was, but I do know that certainly in this area, as I said, our agencies are paid more than in the rest of the county on average. They don't talk to us about pay being the issue. I think it is really there is a recruitment issue. We are looking for next year at perhaps a new model of trying to recruit home care staff. I think it is a national issue. It's not, unfortunately, it's not a sort of career path for people, and a lot of carers are sort of, they're not coming out of schools going into home care, and I think we've got to try and make it more attractive for people. I don't think that's all about the money. I think it's about the attractiveness of the job. And there is a possibility in the future that working more closely with the health service, we can make it maybe more of a career pathway, more of an interesting role to come into. I mean, I think in terms of the overall funding, it's certainly, it's something of an issue for the whole country really in terms of this increase in population. And we will really, in the county council, be working as actively as possible to make the funds stretch to make sure that as much of the money goes towards direct services for people at home rather than the back office type functions, and that's the way forward.
Thank you. Councillor Bierman.
I put down a request for 3, so I'll take the first 2 now, if I may. And that is sort of in a way following on from what Councillor Harvey was saying. There's been much media reporting about 15-minute visits, and that is an area that we might be doing better than the average on. I don't know, you can probably clarify that, but whatever, it's still a problem, I think, in our area. And I wonder how you might be considering addressing that so that the visits are meaningful to the people who are receiving it, because I certainly support care in the community, but it's only as good as the support it gets.
Thank you. We do have a percentage of 15 minutes in the area and across the county, and we are trying to reduce those. We would say that we try not to deliver personal care. You can't deliver personal care in 15 minutes because the care worker should be reading the care plan. That in itself takes time, checking what's happened previously. 15 minutes in Basingstoke, I think we do use some 15-minute visits particularly for, say, somebody with dementia who may not really want a service. They may be living on their own and really not managing, but not really wanting any involvement. We would probably put a sort of what we call a check call in, then to try and introduce them to somebody who can come and support them and get to know them and maybe start doing their shopping and then befriend them and offer more services. So we do 15-minute visits for that type of thing. We've got some 15-minute visits to do things like medication calls. We are also some sort of visits with eye drops, that type of thing. So we're not delivering personal care, but we would agree, we do still have 15-minute visits in the area, and we're truly trying to reduce those. For the medication calls, for instance, we think we might be able to use telecare for those, so people can have a pill dispenser and a reminder to take their medication if they're able to. and that has worked really well in some areas. Obviously, people have to be, able to manage the dispenser, and that will be one of the efficiencies actually that would save funds going forward. But really, 30 minutes minimum is what we should be offering. Yeah.
You didn't quite clarify how we compared with the national figures, but I'll put my second question. You can perhaps comment on that then. And that is, a little while ago, I, in my capacity, did a visit to Northants Hospital, and by chance bumped into Dr. Bishop, or is he Mr. Bishop? I'm not sure which he is, but he's either Mr. Is he? Oh, thank you. And he, I said, of all the situations you face, what's sort of the most challenging? After he'd shown me some elaborate operation on a video screen that he'd just done, and that was nothing to him. His biggest problem was the fact that there were so many people taking up beds who didn't need to be there. And ironically, just this last week, I had a call from somebody who would normally be one of my constituents, but was in the hospital, saying she was stuck there, and she'd really like to come home. And as far as I could tell, the only thing that was sort of in the way that she could translate to me was that she needed some physio, and that she needed, the only way she could get her physio at the moment was to have it in the hospital. Now, I'd like to understand why there is such a big problem in discharging people from hospital to home. I can see why they can't go into residential care. But if they can wanting to go home, is it just coming back to what my colleagues have been saying about there's just not enough money to support them in the home, and so the health service has to carry the can and the burden? Is that what the problem is, or what is the problem?
Just going back to your previous question about 15 minutes, Basingstoke is in line with the national average, I can say. In terms of hospital discharge, I think we work very hard on that, and we prioritise hospital discharge because, as you say, it is awful to be sitting in a hospital bed when you don't need to be there. And we have something the government brought in a few years ago, the Delayed Discharges Act. So we do get fined when people are overstaying their hospital bed. So it's in our interest to make sure that we discharge effectively, and we've recently done some mapping with the hospital, with the managers there, to see where all the processes are. And it's a very complex business, the hospital discharge process, because there are a lot of professionals, there's occupational therapists, there's physios, all these different people involved, and they've all got different forms that they fill in, etc., and to get the person out. So we are working with the hospital to see if we can streamline everything, and we do have quite a large team of social workers and care managers up in Basingstoke Hospital, working to try and support people to come out quickly. So we really are on the case to try and make sure that doesn't happen. There are technicalities sometimes where people end up when they shouldn't have to be there, but we are trying to work to prevent that. And this time next year, in next June, we will have a new contract with our local providers, domiciliary providers, to provide a reablement service for people coming out of hospital. We currently provide it in-house, but we want to expand it, because one of the issues these days is people haven't really had time to convalesce necessarily when they come out of hospital, and they might need quite a lot of care when they're discharged, but actually if they had a little bit of time to get better, a little bit better, they would actually need less care. So we will be having a new service, expressions of interest just going out now for that in June, to have a what we're calling it's a sort of reablement type service for people coming out of hospital.
If I can just clarify, that's sort of a separate, discrete service that you're talking about contracting out, or?
That's right, yes. We had a cabinet paper recently on that, and that's been agreed. That will be, we're investing quite a bit of our funds into that as a way forward.
I'm aware, obviously, that Councillor Bierman and Councillor James have further questions. Does anyone else want to be added to the list of questions? Am I right in assuming that when we move on from questions, that committee will want to make comments, that they want to go forward? In which case, could I ask committee, or in particular Councillor James and Councillor Bierman, who have outstanding questions, whether we could aim perhaps to finish questions about 7:30? Would that be reasonable? And then we can move on to comments. Okay. If you're very quick, Councillor Bierman. Thank you. If we can return to Councillor James then.
Can I go back to the question I asked you about the carers and the Change the Caring Act? If we've got, and figure is that we've got this massive population of people that are providing unpaid care in Basingstoke, what it's saying is that those people that provide that care are in the most deprived areas of the town, and they're providing up to 50 hours or more. If they're going to have a right to a service, what will that mean? I mean, that could be a substantial amount of support, which would then obviously mean a substantial amount of budget. Is that right? That's my first question.
The government has estimated that the care bill is going to cost more, and we will be receiving figures on we will get some extra budget for that. That amount hasn't been published yet, but we have been told we will get extra budget. But I think we're trying to work out now ourselves what the implications will be. We know that, I mean, I can't quote the figures for Basingstoke and Dean, but I know that we do have something like 130,000 carers across the county at the last census who were providing, 50 hours or more of care a week, and we currently don't deliver, obviously, to that number of carers, and it will be reflected in Basingstoke and Dean that we don't provide that level of service. So we're just looking at what the implications are likely to be. But the government has said extra money will be coming our way, but we've yet to see what that is.
Can I pick up on the other point that Councillor Bierman said, that it was about the 15-minute visit? Are you saying that nobody that has a 15-minute visit receives personal care? They're not for personal care, none of those 15-minute. And you didn't tell us how many 15-minute visits people receive you're delivering in Basingstoke, if you could tell us that figure.
I can't tell you the figure, but I know it's about 11% of the care at the moment. But that is not of personal care. That is all the calls, the type of check calls that I've been talking about. So it's about 11%. In terms of saying is nobody receiving personal care, there will be some people, for instance, where somebody might need two people to assist them with hoisting. We may have cases where one of the carers is doing the main part of the care, and then the other carer just comes in for 15 minutes to help with hoisting, because there is equipment that will do it for you, but some people do need two people to help them. So we might have some personal care, we could call it personal care in those scenarios. So I wouldn't hand on heart say that we've got no personal care being delivered in 15-minute calls, but we might have situations like that with a double up.
Just a follow on from that, so it's not the same, but it's a different question. Same question. Could we please have the figures on that as to how many of that 11% are receiving, or what the breakdown is of that support that they're receiving? Are they needing to be fed in those 15 minutes? Are they needing to have their pad changed? Are they also needing their medication? What is it that you're doing in those 15 minutes?
Yes, we can certainly. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get the exact detail of exactly, because we'd have to look through every single care package, but we can give the overall, what is the care for. Certainly, yes, we can provide that. Yeah. In
relation to the discharge from hospital, what have you been fined? You know, what is your rate at the moment? Are you meeting that, or are you being fined?
We're performing well. Hampshire as a whole has one of the lowest rates of fining in the country. We do very well on that in terms of the discharges. I think the fine is £100 a day, which has been the same since the Discharge Act came in about in 2005. It didn't go up. And yeah, that's right. And I think at the moment we're fined about 50,000 a year from Basingstoke Hospital. Not all hospitals do it. Some hospitals will have put the money into extra services, but Basingstoke is one of the hospitals that does still operate the fines. But that amount has come down significantly over the years. I think at the beginning of the year it was 70,000. It's now down to 50. We're getting smarter at that.
So it's £100 a day you're fined for every day that they're in hospital. They shouldn't be. Is it right that we've got, and we were given at the last presentation that you had to sit through, that we have 8 empty bed spaces in D-side that are sitting empty? How long have they been empty? And how long, you know, and that maybe some of these people could have been occupying, saving money that maybe could be spent to deliver some of this additional care. I wonder if you could, if you can't give it to us now, if you could give us an answer in writing as to how long those beds in D-side have been empty, and compare it to the £50,000 that you've been fined this year.
I'm not sure that those beds would have been appropriate for the type of people that are usually delayed. Unfortunately, I don't think. Unfortunately, it isn't quite as easy as that. Residential care is not one of the issues that causes delays. It tends to be around complex situations where it's, for instance, one family member would like the person to come back to their house, another family member would like it somewhere else, or the potential continuing healthcare type screenings. I don't think we could say that those people would actually, have been able to take up those beds. Yeah.
Can you say that they wouldn't be able to take them up? Are you saying that they definitely wouldn't be? Is that you're saying that they would unlikely be? Are you also saying that in this case it's a definite no?
I would say not. I mean, we do the figures on the delayed discharges. We could give you more information of the types of things that people were delayed for, if that would help, so you could see why they were delayed, and then that might be the best way of giving you that information.
Yeah, I'd really welcome that. Thank you. I think what we would like in relation to the Labour group and our concerns is about this ageing population. We talked all the things that we're concerned about tonight. And is there, in relation to the strategic understanding, and I'm not sure that we in Basingstoke, or we haven't actually bought into this, or we are not aware of it. Is there anything going on in relation to need and supply and resource? What's that document that I need to look at in relation to Basingstoke to demonstrate that county and health and everybody is prepared and is going to be able to meet this need in the future?
We now, obviously, you're probably aware, have the Public Health Department in County Council, and they have done quite a bit of work on this and have developed joint strategic needs assessments for the county. And I believe, though I haven't seen it myself, but I think there's one just out about which will cover Basingstoke and Deane. It covers all districts. And the Director of Public Health has done quite a lot of work looking at projections of population, what the issues are. So I think having a look at joint strategic needs assessment is the best thing.
Thank you, Councillor Bin.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's, I hope, a snappy and quick one, but I imagine you'll tell me that doing your work all day, you don't hang around listening to Radio 4 and the You and Yours phone-in programmes. But they had one recently on this topic you may or may not be aware of. One of the things that actually came up was the question, was the topic that you touched on, namely NHS and other equipment scattered around the countryside. And people were appalled by the fact that they had tried umpteen times. This wasn't specifically Hampshire, this was generally, although I think there was a Hampshire caller on, to get the equipment back. And they'd singularly failed, and then when people had passed away, the families tried to do it and they'd failed. So I don't know how good your mechanism is, but one of the less attractive answers that was given by the person in the studio to field the questions was, well, this was sort of said informally, not as a specific policy answer, but that it was sometimes more expensive to clean the material than it was to collect it and the value of the equipment, which I found, A, quite appalling just in general terms, that one would be throwing this sort of stuff away, and that in this day and age where just about everything is sterilised and cleaned, that there wasn't a way of cleaning wheelchairs, and the thing that came up most that nearly everybody was agitated on was walking sticks and so on, sort of whatever they call these days. Yeah.
I mean, the Hampshire Equipment Service does collect, obviously it's a big part of their role is collecting equipment and sterilising it, and got, you know, great big machines to sterilise everything, so we do try and get stuff back as much as possible. I think, you know, as you say, plastic, most things are plastic these days. They can be cleaned, and we would like them back. So we have a little label on all the equipment with a number to ring if you no longer need it. Obviously, sometimes it's the last thing on people's minds if, for instance, somebody's passed on or whatever. But we would like to have that stuff back, because as we say, we can't infinitely go out and buy new things. So yes, agreed.
Is there a way that either we or we as councillors, members of the public, or as an authority can assist you in getting it back? I mean, if as a minimum you were to share with us the telephone number, that if there's a central number that everybody can use, I would like to encourage the people who've occasionally said to me, I've tried to hand things back, to say, here's a number. If I may, not everybody is happy to receive it if you just sort of shove it in the door. And secondly, I much prefer to let people look after their own individual issues than being a collection point. I collect enough junk already, as you will perhaps know, having been to my house.
We can certainly provide the number, and if there are any issues with getting it collected, we will like to hear about those as well. So yes, definitely.
Thank you, members. We have indeed finished questions before 7:30, so thank you very much for that. Thank you also, Sue, for coming again tonight and for your presentation and for your answers. Thank you. We'll move on to comments now, committee. So could I again ask, in the interest of brevity and the public, that we try to restrict ourselves to about 4 minutes, if that's okay. So Councillor Keating's hand was up.
Thank you very much, Chair. My main concern about this issue is the actual increase in demand, which is predicted and which is not financed. It's predicted that the social services budget will go down, but the demand will go up. Now, that's incompatible in our society terms. We know that the people are living longer, and we know that as they get older, they will have greater needs. And as they get even older, those needs will again increase further. I'm not convinced that we have a mechanism currently to provide the care that people actually deserve. We actually have a mechanism to provide the care that we can afford, and then limit that across a range of demands. There is no doubt that the current approach seems to be saying, irrespective of your needs, if we can put you back home, we will, and we should, and if we can, we will, irrespective of whether or not we can provide you with the level of service that you and your needs require. There is no doubt also that there is an absolute need to have residential care. And most of the residential care is in relation to neurological issues, dementia, and etc. Most of the people who qualify under residential care would not qualify for extra care at home or any other facilities at home because they don't have the ability to interact in a rational, regular way. They may have a good day, they may have 10 bad days, but they will always have a mechanism whereby they can't interact daily, hourly, weekly. And I'm not convinced that we in Hampshire have got the balance right between the need to provide residential care and the need to provide extra. Because what we've been told is very simple. Hampshire is going to provide more services, additional services. And Hampshire is going to provide, because it'll have to, an awful lot more to 50,000 carers in Basingstoke. 50,000 carers who get nothing now, but who do a lot. And irrespective of who they're providing the care for, they're going to get services. They're going to get support. And at the same time, the demand is going to going up and up and up. And if you have a static budget in those circumstances, all you can do is cut the services. That's all you can do if you have a static budget. So I have a great concern about that. I've got some experience of talking about bed blocking because I actually provide, I'm a volunteer for a charity that takes people and cares for people back to the medical or other reasons. And I personally was involved in a serious range of discussions about providing a service to allow people to leave hospital. And, I mean, we call it bed blocking. There's a different name for it these days, but the reality is still bed blocking. And the vast majority of the requests that they could not match to get people out of bed, out of the hospital, into their own home, was because there was nobody at the other end. There were people in the hospital providing service and care. When they got home, there was nobody there. And so they legitimately said, we can't let you go. Legitimately. But a lot of the care that they were looking for was someone to provide a cup of tea, make sure the heating was on, make sure they had fresh milk in the house, bread, very basics. And the other key element, of course, was once the hospital discharges, the person's needs have to be met from the minute they arrive at home, not the next day or the following day when it's capable of being fixed. So I've got great sympathy for people who bed block, but most of them are not doing it by choice. It's by organisational ability to respond, which is the issue. But apart from that, I've got no concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you. Following on from the presentation that we had from Dr. Freeman, my concern is that we're going to see people move from hospital, and that's going to be the driver now to move people into their own home. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's is a very positive thing. But the money, there is no new money. It's just recycled money. We have in Basingstoke an ageing population, and we have real concerns around that. We have, as I said, a 17% increase in people with dementia, and it's above the national average. It's not, when we talk about Hampshire, Basingstoke seems to miss out. We're always talking about Hampshire as a whole, and we're not looking at Basingstoke and its need. most people move out of hospital, and when they're out in hospital, you have someone come round with a cup of tea 3 or 4 times a day, and there's someone there. This person's going to be in their own home, and you're talking now about telecare, the possibility of telecare, whereas a little bell will go off and say, don't forget to take your tablet. A little bell will sort of ring. There's not going to be anyone there to give them a cup of tea, or if there is, it's only going to be at certain times. And we have in Basingstoke higher than the national average of single people in their own home. So our average of people who live on their own. So these people are going to be very isolated. And my concern is, how are we going to fund them? I mean, it sounds great, and we've talked about efficiency and streamlining, but the reality, these are people. And in relation to my mother, I wouldn't want her to be at home and have a bell that goes off and have a 15-minute visit. And I just think that we need to, as a committee, have a clearer understanding of the strategic direction and understand in relation to the work that's going on at county. And I think that we need to ask to have that presentation or hear from the Director of Public Health about the joint needs assessment. I think it would be really important for us to have a clearer understanding of that. And I'd ask that we, ask them to come along and present, so we understand, is there going to be the ability to meet this need, and for them to give us some of that evidence, particularly in light of the fact that we have 8.3% of our population that are carers, and of that 8.3, there's a massive amount of those that are actually delivering 50 hours of care a week. And I am concerned that the percentage of people that are receiving 15 minutes have gone up. If you look at the work that went on in relation to the Leonard Cheshire Disability Group, and a report that was produced said that 60% of local authorities now commission 15-minute visits, and that the proportion of visits which local authorities lasted 15 minutes has risen by 15%. And if you're saying that we're in par with the national average, it must mean that we as a local authority have increased the number of 15-minute visits that we're delivering. And there's lots of concerns out there from lots of different groups. It's not just older people, it's disability groups, about the delivery of these 15-minute visits, and they're saying that they can't meet their needs. And I would really welcome the opportunity for that Director of Public Health to come along. And I think there's a real issue around care and housing for older people, and this committee needs to be reassured that county are able to meet that need, if that is the direction of travel from health in the future.
Thank you, Councillor James, thank you. I believe there are no other speakers. If you look at your papers, page...
It was a recommendation that we...
Thank you, Laura. Page 12 of 49, it's recommended the committee note the information, which I think we've done, and then, where relevant, collate views to be fed back to HCC. So if we can pick up what Laura's just said, I'll just double check that we've captured it correctly. You'd like a presentation from the Director of Public Health to come to committee to talk about the strategic direction and the joint needs assessment with Basingstoke and Dean, and present this to us. Are we happy for that to go forward, committee, as a view? Happy? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll put that forward then as the committee's view, which I think brings the paper to a close. Thank you. Sorry, I missed the portfolio holder.
Could I just say something with my remit for health? We had a workshop not so very long ago, and we did have the Deputy Director of Public Health come to talk about her work, etc. And it was the most poorly attended. And I'm afraid if we're going to ask again for a member of Hampshire County Council to come, and we're not having the members, then I don't think it's worth it. But I wasn't very pleased at all, I may say that. She came all the way from Hampshire County Council, it was her remit, and I think we just had a bare minimum of the committee, and no one else came. And the same with the workshop. So I'm not prepared to put anything on again if people are not going to attend it.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. I think we're asking for the director to come here to an Ofcom. To the Ofcom. Okay. It was a workshop, I believe. Yeah. If I think the committee would like that request to go forward, but to come to Ofcom at a date agreed. So if you're happy with that, Councillor Austin, if we can carry that forward. Yes, of course. Yeah, of course. It will be a regular meeting of the Ofcom, so. Thank you, Councillor Keating. Thank you. Thank you, committee. I think that that draws that to a close then. Thank you. So we'll move on now to the other paper that we carried forward, which is paper D. Just give the officers a chance to move around.
Having a swim over
So we just spilt some water. Right, thank you. Thank you, members. Members of the public. We're on to paper D now, which is the Parks, Open Spaces and Playing Fields report. We will have a report from the officers. Then we have some public and member participation, which we'll move on to. And then obviously go back to questions from the committee, and then comments. Just to remind us before we start, just to try and keep us on track if we can. On page 32 of 49, the recommendations, if we can just bear those in mind as we go through. We're invited to comment on the bullet points there. Comment on decisions regarding disposal of green spaces. And these comments will be recorded in a report to go forward to Cabinet, or in fact to further referral to full council. And just remember, of course, that this has been to P&I, and it's also going to EPP next week. And we need just to bear in mind that we're not discussing planning issues tonight, because of course we're not a planning committee, so we need to try and restrict ourselves as much as we can to the remit of this committee. So if I hand over first of all to the officers.
Thank you, Chair. Members, before I introduce this paper, perhaps I can just bring to your attention two errors in the paper, and I apologise first for those errors. Firstly, item 9.5.1. The second bullet point is an incorrect statement and should be deleted from the paper. It was from an earlier draft, and I apologise it slipped through the net. The second bullet point of 9.5.1, the one that starts "if the council." And the second error is on appendix 2. In category A, Barlow's Park Tadley has been identified. That is a piece of land which is leased to the council, not owned by the council, and therefore, whilst it is a strategic park and playing field, shouldn't be within this paper. Thank you. No, it's on the boundary. This report relates to a motion which was presented to full council, which seeks to secure protection of council's parks, green spaces and playing fields. As the chair's already intimated, this motion is also being considered by the P&I and EPP Oscoms under their remit of planning and landowning, in their remit planning and landowning capacity. This committee has received the paper because this is the relevant Oscom that considers matters relating to parks, green space and playing fields. So I'll just obviously remind you of that. The purpose of the report also is to seek member comments on criteria which have been outlined in section 8, but rather than focus on whether a specific green space would or would not be protected under any approach the council took, I don't particularly want to focus on that tonight. I really want seeking member comments about the wider general criteria that officers have put forward. However, I do wish to address concerns that have been brought to my attention in relation to Old Down in the Kempshott, Hatchwell and Begwood area. Old Down is not a strategic park or playing field, neither it is a neighbourhood park or playing field, and therefore if the criteria set out in the report were to be followed, it would fall into category C, which is other parks and green spaces. Assuming the criteria that's in the report were to be adopted by council going forward, Old Down would meet the requirements for protection from development because it is over 0.2 of a hectare in area and it enjoys a status, a SINC status, which is Site of Interest for Nature Conservancy. So therefore it would meet the requirements for protection. None of the exceptions set out in the report would apply to Old Down because no previous council decision has been taken to reserve a right of access through the Old Down area. Having clarified the position regarding Old Down, the Ofcom is invited to comment on whether the council should have a policy regarding the protection of green spaces. Also comment on the three options outlined in Section 8 of the report, and also the categories and exemptions in Section 8 of the report. And Chair, comments made by the committee obviously will help inform a further report to Cabinet, which will seek approval to a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have member and public participation. I have Councillor Tilbury, although I'm not sure that Councillor Tilbury is here. I don't think anyone has seen Councillor Tilbury. No. Councillor Harvey, and we also have Marion Wollstonecraft and Paul Beavers. Councillor Harvey, do you want to go first, or are you happy to let the public? Brilliant, thank you very much. Could we have Marion first, if that's all right? Thank you. You have around 2 minutes, but we won't cut you off in mid-flows. That's fine. Don't worry.
Thank you, councillors. I'll try and keep it to approximately 2 minutes. My name is Marion Wollstonecraft. I am Secretary of Natural Basingstoke, and that is the umbrella organisation which represents the 14 voluntary conservation groups in Basingstoke. We ask the councillors to note the comments from this umbrella body. In the paper which councillors are asked to consider, there are 3 points made, which I think the gentleman has just summarised. We strongly believe that this policy is needed, and support and thank the councillors for bringing this forward. The councillors are asked to decide whether anything over 0.2 of a hectare in square area should be a decision. The development of a 0.2 of a hectare should be a decision by the full council if there is a threat of disposal or not. We believe that is necessary because the smaller and lower grade spaces are not necessarily well known by members of select committees or officers, whereas councillors can represent their community to whom some of these fairly small spaces are absolutely vital and very highly valued. However, the basis of identifying and evaluating and categorising green spaces, we believe, is fundamentally flawed. This concept of category A, B and other. It ignores policy CN7 on community considerations. It ignores the green infrastructure strategy EM5. Firstly, the selection process is focused on size and human amenity value for sports and walking around, walking your dog, etc., with a hodgepodge of green spaces consigned to another category, which include our LNRs, our triple SIs, our most highly valued green spaces, our most rare green spaces are in this category called other, whatever other means. The problem, I think, stems from the fact that there are 2 sets of categorization of green space. One is based on the statutory requirements for the extent of green space available and the facilities available to residents, and the other category looks at the quality of a green space in terms of LNR, triple SI, SINC, etc. These 2 categories do not meet. They do not have any overarching structure in which they can be used. And so the tendency is for the statutory designations to be the starting point for evaluation rather than merely one element in the total spectrum of why a green space should be valued and how highly a green space should be valued. Second, the officer has mentioned that there are 1 or 2 spaces which were exempted from consideration, we would stoutly maintain that there should be no exceptions from this evaluation process. Unless the green space has been... Sorry?
Marion, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but that's been nearly 4 minutes, so if you
Okay.
could bring it to a close, if that's okay.
Okay, fine. Finally, to provide a balanced evidence base for assessing green spaces in terms of their value to the borough as a whole, there are a number of dimensions which should be taken into account. Frequency of use, size, unique qualities, etc. In an overarching evaluation, not just is it big, is it considered to be of use to everybody across the borough, do we have a sports pitch in it? So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marion. Now it's Paul Beavers. Thank you, Paul.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair. Can I just precede my comments by commenting on the officer points at the beginning? My recollection about the question of Old Down and retained or reserved for was that when Tibbles presented their report to Council, the Chief Executive actually stood up and said, and pointed out to the committee at the time, that the Council had reserved rights across Old Down, and that's where all this began. Okay, that's the preceding comments. I'd like to speak about exceptions in the report as they affect Old Down significantly. The possibility of a road across Old Down was not only unrevealed, but raises questions about the original planning approach. Over 6 years of community action would not have happened if this had been known. Councillors, through their actions, we feel, are disenfranchising wards and residents by treating our spaces as commodities instead of vital components for our communities or for nature. The Council and Cabinet hang on grimly to all the levers of power, money, land, staff, process and decision making, and it is using them to thwart its own residents and undermine the empowerment it claims it wants to support. We conclude that Cabinet as landowner is refusing to allow justifiable local nature reserve status for community land, ours, to avoid the risk that the local planning authority recommends refusal of the council's own planning application to build a road across Old Down at any time. We ask committee to recommend A. Retained rights, whatever they are, for road access are removed and infrastructure planning process reviewed. B. Cabinet to agree LNR status to all of Old Down, or portfolio holder for the environment be required to state in writing, in line with Nolan principles, the reasons why after 1 year Cabinet has withheld a decision and not given reasons for not granting LNR status, and how that is compatible with Council's responsibilities as LPA, or consistent with the Council Plan, the Green Infrastructure Strategy, Living Landscapes, the Draft Local Plan, SINC status, the support of Natural England, and above all the interests of residents. C. LNR and Field in Trust status be approved for Old Down and Beggarwood, and we've sought those before. That Council puts nature and communities at the heart of Basingstoke, not just the corporatist development agenda that seems to dominate. Finally, Kemshott District Residents Association have asked us to say that they support all the comments of this group, plus they note inconsistencies with the draft local plan policy CN7. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I can see Councillor James has a hand up. Is that a question for Paul? Are you happy to take a question?
Paul, could you explain a bit more to me about you've applied for LNR status. Can you just tell us a bit more about that, and what has been your communication with the council in relation to that?
A year ago, we asked for LNR status for Old Down and Beggar Wood, and that followed meetings with Natural England to actually see if they felt that we would meet their criteria to be a local nature reserve. And they were in agreement, and we received a letter from them stating that they would be very supportive of the council agreeing to us Old Down and Beggar Wood becoming a local nature reserve. And it would make sense for the two sites to be one together, in fact. Actually, the deputy chair initiated the application, as I say, that was 1 year ago. And there was an interim meeting, I think back in May, where several members of the committee went to meet the officers and were told that it was that their view was that it should be rejected, that they would recommend rejection, which we didn't accept. We knew it was going to cabinet, and it did, but we've never actually had a decision, and we still haven't had a decision.
Sorry, Councillor James, if I could job with the button there. Strictly speaking, we're not discussing the LNR tonight. Sorry, my button keeps going off. We're not really discussing the LNR tonight, so if it's another question linked to that, it's probably not within the remit of this discussion tonight or this paper.
Well, I suppose it is really, it is in relation to the value that we place on that land, and it's really, why was it rejected, is my question. Do you know why?
We've had no decision.
There was a report which was taken to the cabinet member in, I believe, April of this year. So is that better? There was a report which was taken to the cabinet member in April of this year, which discussed the LNR status or LNR status for Old Down. The cabinet member has very recently taken a decision, and that decision came out of what we call the call-in process only very late yesterday evening. So a decision has been taken on it. He hasn't rejected it, and I don't unfortunately have a copy of the decision to be able to communicate with you what that decision was, but a decision has been taken. I can tell you he hasn't rejected it out of hand. He has not rejected it out of hand.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you. I know we should move on really, Sean, unless it's really, really vital.
Oh, thanks for all your emails, by the way. Are you aware that currently there are no protections for any land owned by the council or otherwise in Basingstoke?
I don't know if that's true. My understanding was that there are some covenants on land. I know widely that is the case, but I believe there were some covenants, but that's as much as I know.
Are you aware that the reason we're discussing this tonight is because I put a motion forward because officers of this council were prepared to talk about building on land which is a currently designated park, right? So we were simply trying to break the mold to go from no protection to protection. Are you aware of that? And are you aware that the intention of the motion, which I put forward, so I know its intention, was not to exclude anything that people wanted to include? Are you aware of that? Take it from me. I produced a motion in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. And can I thank Paul and Marion for coming back again tonight and for the very long wait they've had, and obviously for the public who've come to support them as well. Thank you very much. We have Councillor Harvey now. Councillor Harvey, you have 2 minutes. Might be a bit more strict with you than we have been with the public.
can I declare an historic personal interest that doesn't apply anymore, but I'll declare it for openness and transparency, that I had a personal interest in 2 sites that were relating to the local plan. That's on the record there, and it's on my register of interest for anybody to see. No longer applies, but I want to be open and transparent about it. Actually, I'm just trying to look for the decision notice, and I can't find it on the list of key decisions that were taken, so it must be literally hot off the presses, because it's not on the public portal. The Labour Group's motion is really about protecting open space, and we've been pushing for this for quite some time in various forms. We've been really trying to get this through the council for years. My view is that Old Down has got to be protected, and I was surprised that it fell outside of the criteria. I welcomed the officers' views and the officers' comments tonight, but the Cabinet's actions on this have not been good so far. When Kennel Farm came forward, and the appeal begins on the 20th of November, the policy in the local plan didn't contain a 50-metre buffer for protecting the ancient woodland. That was dropped. It shouldn't have been, and that was a mistake. So the record so far of the administration in protecting Old Down is not a good one. But we can protect it. We should protect it. It is a sink, and it is an exceptional site of biodiversity. For those reasons, it needs to be included one way or the other. There is no need to run a road through Old Down. Absolutely no need whatsoever. And the master plan and the evidence base for Merry Down shows that there is no need for the road. The borough's local plan, as we all know, is an unmitigated disaster. Let's not make it worse by destroying Old Down. Let's not compound the crisis we've already created. It should be made into a local nature reserve, and I hope that the Cabinet members' decision is to make it a local nature reserve, because if it isn't, I for one, and I know my colleagues, will be challenging that Cabinet member all the way on why they've rejected it. Let's not... And also, let's not try and overcomplicate this. I noticed the Conservatives' recommendation being put forward this evening, but let's not try and overcomplicate this. So what you actually wind up doing is killing the principle that we're talking about tonight in a load of detail. How many times you've criticised other members of this council for producing overcomplicated recommendations? Well, here we go again, but it's the boots on the other foot this time. Don't kill this principle of trying to protect the open space. Let's have it as a principle that can be adopted, that will protect, as others have said, very more eloquently than I have this evening, all of our open spaces.
Thank you, Paul. Can I ask, first of all, for hands, anyone who wants to ask questions of officers before we move on to any sort of debate? There's quite a few hands up. You just keep your hands up for a second so we make sure we capture everyone. Thank you. I think as before, if we can, for the benefit of the public, aim to be as brief as possible. So I'll say 2 questions for each member, if possible, please, and we'll try and restrict ourselves to that. Thank you. Thank you. I believe Councillor Court was the first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a very quick question. I'd like to ask the officers why Old Down wasn't actually included in Category B. It's paragraph 8.3.1. Neighbourhood parks are those green spaces which provide for the needs of residents within a particular community or neighbourhood. I don't know if the officer is aware, but when Gabriel Park was originally being planned, the council commissioned a firm of consultants who met over a period of time at Kempshott Junior School, offering all residents the opportunity to say how they'd like to see that particular park develop. And one of the big things that came about was that they wanted it to be a peace and quiet park, a park of tranquility. It goes on to say they are accessible on foot and by bicycle. Old Down Park deliberately does have no public parking because it was meant for access on foot and by bicycle. And provide facilities which are directly relevant to the needs of the local community. It wasn't long after it was identified that a community hall which was required, an Old Down Hall was built on that piece of land. And it includes fitness equipment, could include fitness equipment, games facilities, community event space, wildlife areas. Well, it seems to have become one big wildlife area, which fits in what the residents originally envisaged it to be, a peace and quiet park. So my question really is why wasn't Old Down Park put into Category B?
As I said in my introduction, Councillor Mrs. Court, it isn't a neighbourhood park. The general approach taken to our parks across the borough is that there would be a neighbourhood park, generally speaking, within a neighbourhood, and clearly in that particular area of the town, the Beggarwood, Hatchwell and sort of north or south Kempshire area, you have two quite large parks, Beggarwood and Old Down, and certainly Beggarwood, as you'll see in the paper, does have a neighbourhood park status. Sadly, Old Down does not. I can't give you any more specific answer to that, other than that sort of general distribution of, broadly speaking, one per area.
I would like just to come back on that, because part of this consultation process, it was... Okay, there were two lots of consultation. One went on over at Hatch Warren to see what the Hatch Warren residents wanted with the Beggarwood Park, and the one happened over in Kempshire at the junior school with what people wanted to see on Kempshire. And out of the whole process, the one side on Beggarwood was going to be the action park with the maze and sports barn, which actually never got developed, but lots of activity. And the residents, I think, on both sides of the A30 actually wanted a footbridge to connect the two, so people who wanted action could go one side and people that wanted peace and quiet and tranquility could go onto the Kempshire side. They were looked at as one park with two different types of events going on. So to give one now a neighbourhood park categorisation and Old Down not, I think is a bit unfair on the way it was all originally planned.
Can I just say, irrespective of its designation, clearly under Category C of this proposal, Old Down would qualify, would meet the requirements for protection. So the fact that it's Type A or Type B, in many respects, is irrelevant. It does qualify, or does meet the requirement for protection under this policy, irrespective of its categorisation.
Thank you. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. Can you confirm that categorisation in this paper, A, B and C, is not an agreed categorisation, has not been developed or agreed by the Council, has only been created for the purpose of this paper, and has not been agreed by anybody? Can you please confirm that?
I don't think I'm able to confirm that, Councillor. Clearly, there are, as I said earlier, there are a number of neighbourhood parks identified in various guidance documents which we use for planning purposes, identified. So I don't think I can confirm it is or it isn't.
Perhaps you could identify where it's been agreed by the Council that there should be three categories.
It hasn't.
So there was no Council agreement that there should be three categories. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Councillor, I missed that point. Could I just ask you to...
There is no council as in councillors making decisions, not officers. There is no agreement endorsed by the councillors in council that there should be three categories.
No, and hence that's why we are putting forward those categories for your comment this evening, so we can take a view back to the Cabinet.
May I just continue, please? Bear in mind, I initiated this whole debate. I think I'm allowed some leeway from yourself, and I'm sure I'll get it. I won't bully you. Can I ask you what level of protection you intend within Section 8 to apply to all of the sites identified in Section A, Category A, B and C? What level of protection is intended to apply?
Clearly, sites fall into Category A. Sites fall into Category A or category B clearly will have a level of protection. Sites within category C would have a level of protection if they met the points highlighted in 8.4.2, that they are a green space, that they have at least 0.2 hectares in size, and that they have a heritage value or a nature conservation value.
Thank you. You refer to A and B having some level of protection. Could you explain the definition of some in your view? I mean, are they protected from development or they're not? Is my type of question. Thank you.
If they meet the protection criteria, the answer to your question is yes.
Why do you feel the need to have 3 categories? Why not just one list?
The reason for 3 categories is just to identify the hierarchy of green space we have across the borough. Various, obviously, hierarchy categorisations, if that's a better phrase, but the various categorisations of space we have across the borough, some which have a strategic borough-wide importance, some which have a neighbourhood importance, some which have a slightly lower importance, but still important spaces.
Are there any categories within the motion that you're supposed to be addressing which refers to places of less value or with a need for less protection?
The paper isn't about the level of protection we apply. The paper is trying to identify sites which we would seek to apply protection to, and the level of protection applied would be the same irrespective of the category it falls into.
If I may, can I just take you back to the actual motion, which was proposed by a councillor, me, accepted by the full council by majority, which says, that the Cabinet ensure that our long-established pastoral be protected from development. Now, this is not be protected from a small house or a big house, be protected from development. Do you feel the ability to waver and go away from that is your responsibility?
I'm sorry, Councillor, I don't quite understand the point you're asking there, sorry.
Okay, I'll try to explain it better. The motion is where we started at on this particular debate. The motion does not say give them some protection. It doesn't say give them a level of protection, or some, with your words, some. It says be protected from development. It's not be protected sometimes, or some of them should be protected. It says they should be protected. Why are you deviating from that?
I don't believe I am. The category A, category B, and the sites which meet the criteria outlined in category C would receive the same level of protection.
So, you say.
No, the same level of protection.
But perhaps you can help me further. What level of protection? Give us a few examples.
The level of protection is very hard to very hard to define without obviously out knowing what proposals might come forward for that space, if any proposals came forward at all. Does it no motion that the council perhaps agreed to could give that absolute protection that no development happen on any site, come what may, because there could at any point in future be a further motion to council which asked for that protection to be released. What the paper obviously seeks to do is set categories of sites which would meet a level of protection, and that those sites would or could be referred to full council for debate should the council choose to dispose of them, or should officer perhaps have a recommendation to dispose of them, that it would be taken to full council, and they would then give the opportunity for a full debate to take place at full council about any disposal proposal associated with development.
But isn't that why we're here in the first place? I, as a councillor in Southam, learned by the back door that the parks and open spaces in my ward were being proposed by officers to be built on. That's the bottom line. And so I thought, well, we'll stop that. We'll create a policy that officers have to comply with. The policy is they won't be developed. That's the policy. We will not allow them to be developed. And now you're saying officers want the option. And I'm saying councillors should decide whether you have the option or not. Why does that cause you a difficulty?
And hence why one of the comments we're seeking from the committee is whether we should or shouldn't have a policy of protection. That's one of the recommendations, I believe, in item little one of 2.1, which whether the council should have a policy of protection. That's what I'm seeking committee's views on.
Sorry, Councillor Keating, if I may, just for a moment, please. Thank you, Councillor Keating. I think that's why we're here, isn't it? We're here to comment on this paper, and make our comments and carry them forward as our P&I, as our EPP. Well, that's what we're asked to do in the paper. We're asked to carry our comments forward. Sorry, Councillor Keating, please, if I may just finish.
Of course.
Thank you. Therefore, we can make our comments. Obviously, you're entitled to ask questions of the officer. We can then make our comments when we're going to comments, and obviously you're perfectly entitled to make the comments that you are expressing now through your questions. So, if I could ask you perhaps to sum up one more question, and then we'll move on, please. If you've got more questions, we can hopefully come back, depending on the time, but we do have quite a long list of other councillors who'd like to speak.
If the motion that we're discussing of seeking, for the purposes of implementing, by the way, this is not for discussion whether we should protect or not, because the council has already decided to protect. We're only talking about how to protect. And we need to understand that, because the motion has already been carried by full council. But apart from that, I'll come back if you don't mind.
Thank you, Councillor Keating. Councillor James.
Thank you. In 4.1, you talk about the officer's interpretation of the motion. I'd just like to understand that a bit more, in how you interpreted that, and why you also didn't interpret it in relation to the motion to be land that was not owned by the council. When we're talking about the value of open space in the borough, why did you not interpret it, the motion to be, or just that the motion would be land owned by this council?
Our interpretation of, and you see the words there in 4.1 where it quite clearly says our long established parks and our open spaces, was that by the word "are" we interpreted that to be spaces which the council had control over, rightly or wrongly, but that's how we as officers interpreted that. Clearly, for land which the council does not control, it is very difficult for us as a landowning authority and as a Parks and Open Spaces Authority to control third-party spaces. And clearly the way third-party spaces can be controlled is through the planning process. And as both myself and the Chair have said already, this motion has been referred to the Planning and Infrastructure Auscom, and I believe they have already made their comments and adjusted the various local plan policies which went out for consultation to reflect this particular motion.
Just on that point, in the borough we have a list of buildings that don't have status for protection, but that we have a local list of buildings that we value, and those buildings are not all in our ownership, but we, for example, in my own ward we have a building, Eli Lilly, and there's a lot of value placed on that as a community, and it's on the list, but it's not in our ownership. Is that the case, that we have such a list that was produced in 2007?
In relation to buildings, I believe there is as you say, a local list, but I believe that has some planning control over it. I might stand correct on that. That's my understanding.
No, there's no planning control over that. It just is for those that want to develop a site. It shows that there is merit to that site, to that building, but it isn't saying you can't develop it, but it's showing the value that that community places on it. And I think in relation to what we were wanting to achieve with this motion is that we had a list of open spaces and parks that we all value, and when we talk about the word and we use the word our long established parks, that's Basingstoke and Dean's long established. It's not our as in the council owned, it's our, and that's so could you see that we could produce a list in the same way that we've done in relation to the historic buildings, or it's, what it is called local list supports efforts to preserve the character and appearance of buildings that are included on it, enables the architectural and historic interest of these buildings to be properly considered against development proposals submitted to the borough. It provides clarity of ownership to the local community, developers and planning officers, so that they are aware of the interest of the building as early as possible. And it goes on, but there's no reason why it can't be developed, but it's just showing the value that we place on that as a borough. Is that something that we could do in relation to this list? And if it is, does the paper you produced give us that?
There's 3 points to my answer. First of all, in response to the motion, we did ask all councillors to identify to us the parks or spaces they felt justified some level of protection, and they are actually outlined in Appendix 1 there, and you can see there's about 30 or 40 sites on there which members identified to us. Clearly there are some, in my opinion at least, some absences from that list which perhaps I would wish to see included in that list. So I think there has been an opportunity for members to identify, and that opportunity still exists, I must add. Secondly, in relation to the local list in relation to buildings of particular interest, it's not my area of expertise as to how that list was developed, but yes, if that is a view of this committee's, that's how they would like to see a list associated with green spaces to be developed, it could be something that would be explored. So I'm not saying it's a no by any means, but I think if that's the view of the committee, then that's something we can feed back to Cabinet in due course.
Does there need to be does there need to be different categories in relation to this list? So we have a list of all those sites that we all value, and all as our meaning Basingstoke and Dean. Do we then need to have a categorisation of them?
There is danger, Councillor, that if we have almost every open space that's available on a list, dare I say it, that almost it becomes undervalued, if I can use that expression. I don't mean it, but the danger is that the spaces could become undervalued. I recognise, clearly there are some very key spaces which play, as I probably alluded to earlier, some strategic importance to the town. We would not, for example, want to see Eastrop Park developed. Clearly that's one of our key primary spaces in the town, and hence that's why that falls into category B. Equally, we would want to retain the neighbourhood park aspect within our various communities, and hence that's why the neighbourhood park category was put forward. The reason why the historic and conservation criteria was put forward in the category C locations was we felt that sites which had that designation, some sort of nature designation or some sort of conservation designation, that they had a value which was worth protecting, and hence that's why we put that forward. The danger is if we simply say, well, every space that we have, every green space is worthy of protection, it would, dare I say, avoid situations where, or it would prevent perhaps opportunities which did arise, where we were perhaps looking to use some area of green space to facilitate something else. And I can think of recent examples where we have, as a council, made available green space to facilitate some significant regeneration schemes. And so I think we've got to be careful we don't tie every piece of land down and say this won't be protected because we want a blanket protection.
But then, and we're not asking for all pieces of open space to be put, or all part. We are asking for parts that people wish to be protected, but we're not asking for all open space. And clearly, councillors haven't given you all open space in relation to that list. But is there, what I want to be clear of, if we had a list, and can I just go back to the listed buildings, the local list backs up our existing planning policies and guidance, adding weight to the consideration already given to the preservation of existing buildings, agricultural history, historic interest by development proposals affecting them. So it doesn't, it just gives weight to, and it says this community supports that. In relation to the last piece of open space that you were talking about, which is Taverner Fields, the community, in relation to my own ward, we gave up a third of a piece of open space, which the piece of space represents 45% of all of our open space in Norden, and we gave up a third of that to have the site regenerated. But the community was supporting that, recognising the way forward, but they were consulted on and agreed that. Now, and recognised the value of taking some of that. They were saddened, but they agreed to that. Now, that was in consultation, and they then were happy for that to happen. Now, if it was on the list, they would still have been consulted. There's no reason why, and it's not saying that you can't develop it, it's saying that we place value on this. Is that not possible to do that?
Well, I would argue that the extra categorisation we put forward does actually try to achieve that. That yes, we categorise sites into A, B and C. To fall into category C, there's obviously some conservation, size and heritage criteria to be met. But that sites that fell into that, one of the options in the paper talks about whether we do refer all decisions about these spaces to full council or not, or whether, as is currently the case, decisions about disposal of these spaces remains with the cabinet member. So I'm not trying to exclude or include anything here. I'm simply trying to get members' comment. And I say your suggestion that we perhaps have a list, if that is the view of the committee, then I'll happily take that forward in my future report to the cabinet.
It's the last one.
In relation to the list, my concern, it then pits people against each other by saying this isn't in this category, and then there's the wars that carry on, and I'm not sure it's useful, because really what the spirit of the motion was that we have some wonderful open space and we need to afford it protection, or that we need to place value on it. And I'm not sure in doing this you then get, well, why isn't this site in A, and why have we got C, and I'm not sure that you've achieved that, and I think it devalues open space, and I think that's not a good thing for this borough.
Was that a question?
Does categorisation do that? I mean, you can see that tonight in why is L down C and not B, and
I believe it does. Clearly there are contrary from some of the audience and some of the members here, but I believe it does achieve what you were aiming to secure through the spirit of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you. The first is just a comment more than a question, but just because I've got to say to fit into what I'm going to ask, and that is this motion from the Conservatives, which I thank them for putting down in writing, very helpful, but as Councillor Harvey's already said, it's about as complex as they come, and therefore if something is addressed in this motion, God bless you, but I don't understand what it's trying to say, and I haven't had the time to digest it, so I apologise in advance of all my remarks. That said, I'd like to firstly understand on page 4, 3, the third criteria, the disbenefits, and it lists disbenefits, and it says assessments may be carried out on the sites where there's never any real likelihood of development. Now, to me it seems we're not just talking about development, we're talking about anything that might happen on them. And what is the harm? Why is it a disbenefit to have a list of our open spaces with an understanding of their value and what we might wish to protect. Why is that a disbenefit? I can't understand that.
I think the point we're trying to make there in the report is that clearly there are many areas of space which perhaps people may wish to see protected, and we could end up undertaking a large number of assessments on those sites, and say some of which would have very little likelihood of development. So the disbenefit would be, it potentially could be a resource, a lot of resource input to something which perhaps was unnecessary.
It wouldn't need to be a biodiversity expert opinion. One could have a sort of marker on the site, could one not, that then goes on to sort of say, if there is something that somebody wants to do with this site, then we undertake something more detailed. But in the meantime, this site has merit and therefore should be protected. I mean, it doesn't need to be, as I say, expensive or time-consuming. It could just be 2 sentences, couldn't it?
It could, but it equally could be 3 categories, and I think that's the point we're trying to make, is that you can actually achieve that assessment by possibly categorising your sites into various categories, and within that setting some criteria.
I'll come back on that when we're talking about the other measures. Could you explain to me why, under any other implications, one says there are no other identified direct implications arising from this report? And to my mind, one of the biggest is environmental, and it doesn't have a heading, environmental, and what we're trying to do on the environmental front. How could something, when we talk about open spaces, as big and as important as that, be sort of lost?
I take your point about environmental. When we were preparing this report, we did question whether we should have something in there about environmental. The feeling was we were talking here about criteria for protection, not necessarily the environmental benefits of each individual space or green space. Clearly, play spaces, open spaces, green spaces have an environmental benefit generally. So I think we were trying to say it was a given that was a part of this paper, but not one we specifically felt need to comment on as an implication.
Could I request then, when you come back, that there be some sort of overarching paragraph that sort of says that fundamental, because the givens sometimes can get lost in the process?
Yes, certainly. I think in the report, which eventually goes to Cabinet, picking up the comments from 3 Oscoms, clearly there would need to be a paragraph detailing sort of environmental implications of what it is we are suggesting perhaps Cabinet would seek to adopt.
Thank you. One very last and slightly parochial question. Could you, under Appendix 2, Neighbourhood Parks and Playing Fields, you refer there to Taylor's Farm, you no doubt mean it with an apostrophe, but which one's that? Because I don't know it, and I try to represent the area.
When you're correct, first of all, about the apostrophe, and I apologise for that error there, but when you say Taylor's Farm, do you mean which space within Taylor's Farm? Or I believe the space we're talking about there is the large, very large space which includes the playing fields. That's the space I believe we're talking about.
In that case, well, in a way, then you've got it twice, because you've got this playing fields right at the bottom. So, you know, I mean, give it double protection by all means, but I don't think that's what you're intending.
My error noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to explore the categories a little bit further, that's okay, because throughout the conversation I couldn't quite work out whether it was a hierarchy or it wasn't a hierarchy. I know the appendix refers to it as a hierarchy, but as the questions have gone round, it sounds as though it's not a hierarchy, and that the wording has moved away from a category to perhaps more criteria. Could you confirm for me, please?
The categories are trying to identify a type. We've used the word hierarchy. Clearly, from a parks and open spaces perspective, a strategic park, one of our premier parks, such as East Rock Park, clearly has a far more strategic importance within the borough than a space tucked away in a neighbourhood. So that's why we've referred to strategic parks and playing fields, why we've referred to neighbourhood parks. Neighbourhood parks equally have a function within a community, and then there's this sort of catch-all category and other green spaces. In terms of criteria, what we are saying is that the criteria is effectively the categorisation, but within category C there are these supplementary criteria which talk about size, nature value and conservation value.
I think the problem there is when what is of somebody's value is subjective, because obviously to one member of the community it's of high value and to another it's of absolutely no value at all. And so I can understand the problem. So for me, if it was possible, I think the criteria perhaps is okay. But I think they should all be, like you said at one stage, they should all be offered equal protection. And explicitly to understand that somebody who perhaps uses swings and roundabouts may not be the cup of tea for everybody, whereas Old Down and Begwood is of high importance to those people as well.
As I said earlier, both Old Down and Beggarwood under this categorisation and use of this criteria would be protected and would benefit from the same level of protection. So yeah, the point you made is noted, but I say we believe that the categorisation doesn't necessarily place value on space, it simply puts them into categories that allows us to say anything falling into this category would effectively have a level of have a protection.
And one final question is, there was a comment at the very beginning of the report which was the officer's interpretation, and obviously it refers to controlling of planning. I'm not going to get into discussing planning. But what I wanted to understand was, and whether you can answer this question, is as landowner, we can obviously set criteria and rules, and obviously you have to make a planning assessment on something that comes forward. If we made a decision to protect these sites, which one plays the trump card? The landowner placing the rules, or a planning appeal perhaps? I know it's a bit crystal ball the question, but I'm trying to understand is how secure are we in protection?
I think it would be first and foremost landowner. If we as a council made a decision as landowner we wouldn't develop land X, dare I say it wouldn't even get to the planning environment. It's only if we as a council decided to develop land X would it then have to meet certain planning criteria before it was approved for development. So possibly a borough-owned land actually could have, dare I say, two opportunities for protection. One is us as a landowner, and secondly would be as a planning authority.
Thank you. Thank you. So that sort of, for me, in my mind, it just crystallises the importance of getting this right then, because it is the trump card, essentially.
Thank you. Councillor Keating, is this a point of order?
We had a discussion earlier about the cabinet decision, the cabinet members' decision about protection of Old Down, and it was published last night, or what to that effect. I've actually got it here. And let me just read you the relevant bits. It's not that long. The cabinet member supports the principle of designating Old Down and Beggarwood as a local nature reserve. Oh, great. Until you get to the point where it says, agrees that this should not happen or be pursued until the likely requirements or additional facilities or proposals on both sides, both of them, including in relation to the allocation of 1 or 6 money, should not be designated until after the emergence of the local plan, i.e. long grass, some years ahead. You're obviously not aware of that. Were you aware of the decision but not the detail?
I was aware of this decision coming out of call-in late yesterday, Councillor, and it was only after that I was aware of what the decision was, because the recommendation which officers took to the cabinet member, that his decision is slightly different than the recommendation officers took to him.
I just want to make sure, Chair, that the audience understands what's now happening is the cabinet member, the Tory cabinet member, is agreeing with you, but you can't have it for some years' time yet. Oh, you have to ask him that.
Councillor Keating, Councillor
Sure.
Keating.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a,
Councillor Keating, no one in this room, or certainly amongst members here, is a greater supporter of Old Down as an Eleanor than I am, and I'm on record of that, and I have for a long time supported that. I would love to discuss and debate Old Down as an Eleanor right now, but unfortunately it's not actually what we're talking about tonight, so we must move on, I'm afraid. I'll move on now to Councillor Washburn.
Thank you. Maybe just me being a bit silly, but I just wanted to kind of explore the actual level of protection over the different categories. Are the different categories affording a different level of protection?
No, they're not.
Because obviously with the categories being such as they are, that gives you that perceived feeling. In regard to the actual protection, once these are listed in either one long list or in the categories as you proposed in the report, are these protected forevermore, or are these going to be decisions that will be taken either at full council or by the cabinet holder in relation if something was to was going to happen, redevelopment on that land?
Thank you for that question, Councillor. I refer you to recommendation little 2, where the committee is being invited to comment on whether decisions regarding the disposal of green spaces should be taken by full council, and if so, whether this is applied to, and I just allow you to read that particular one, but it's there as a recommendation.
So does that mean even if these are all listed, then each decision would still go to full council if there was a proposal to build, or are they going to be protected as soon as they're then on that list?
If that was the view of the committee, that's something which will go forward in my report to the cabinet member, to the cabinet. Clearly what I'm trying to do is coordinate responses from the 3 OSCOMs, so I can take that report and come up with a proposed way forward in terms of protection. So it's very difficult for me to answer that question, other than say, I'm seeking views of the committee about the way forward. If it is supportive, I would hear that. Equally, if I have comments to make, again, I'm open to those comments.
So you're really saying it's in our hands then?
It is for you to comment on the criteria I've put forward.
Thank you. Councillor Miller. No, we're done. Okay. And Councillor Lee.
It's just to confirm or deny the 8. Oh, there we go. That could be glass on that help. 7.3 on 5 out of 11. Can you confirm that's the Saundersfield in Basingstoke as opposed to the Saundersfield in Tadley? Because that's all near the leisure centre. And the other one is a typo. The Southdown Road is apart from the road. Southdown is one word. I lived there for 25 years.
First of all, apologies for the typo. In terms of the Saundersfield, I think the section in brackets confirms it's opposite the leisure park in Basingstoke. Sorry, the leisure park in Basingstoke. Sorry, yes. That Saundersfield mentioned in the report is Basingstoke, not Tadley.
All right, thank you, members. I don't know whether Councillor Keating has any more questions. You did mention that you did. If you do, Councillor Keating, could I ask you please to be very, very brief, because we want to go into debate as soon as possible and be finished by 9:30, preferably.
I'll be even briefer. I've got no more questions.
Even better. Thank you very much, Councillor Keating. Right, debate and comments, please. You just don't mind holding your hands up a little bit longer so that the officer can actually register this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keating, you still only get 4 minutes, even with 2 hands up, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding...
Do beg your pardon, you're not top of the list either, it's Councillor Miller first.
Thank you, Chair. Please, I'd like to request a little bit of tolerance because I'm going to put my P&I hat on. I'd like to kill, I think, a presumption that I've heard during the questions and presentations from the public. I was chairing the meeting when a consultation group came to present to us, and it was the transport consultation. And when they showed a map with a road ostensibly going near Old Down, it was as big a surprise to me as anybody else. That road, that line on the map, was indicative. It was nothing to do with studies. It was a line drawn by the consultants. It has not been examined any detail. It is a line on a map. There's nothing behind it whatsoever. And if you look at it, it's a ludicrous place to put a road. I'd just like to kill that now. Thank you. The point we're getting to here is really to identify criteria. I'm a great believer in criteria because it encompasses every portion of a category, if you will, without identifying names. If it falls into criteria, then you can apply that criteria to whatever we want to debate about it. The issue on protection, as far as this committee is concerned tonight, is, I think, very well covered in the beginning of the paper. When this committee is requested whether to comment on whether the council should develop a policy of protection for its green spaces. Unequivocally, yes. I'll discuss the options in a second, and the categories and exceptions, because I think they need a bit of modification that takes out some of the confusion that I think I've heard tonight. I've got a motion that the members have seen, the public haven't, and I'm going to read it out in a minute. But I think if we look through this, when I read the paper, I was a little concerned myself about how this was put together. I think what we're all concerned about is our green open spaces, no matter what they're used for. Green open space within Basingstoke and on the surrounding area of Basingstoke is incredibly valuable. It's valuable for our communities. I live in Chinham, as does Councillor Bierman, and we don't have a lot of open space, but we have open space within our community because it was built like that 30 years ago. So we enjoy a lot of green, freedom of movement in open space, and we can get to other open space very easily. So I really do go along with everybody that's been speaking tonight. I grew up in the country, so I do appreciate what's going on. But I think if you apply a criteria, and the designations we see here aren't made by this council, they're made by county councils. One is made by Europe, and it's dictated onto us. That's one of the penalties of belonging to the European Union. The way I see it, I've been there too. The way I see it, I'd like to put forward a motion, Chair. As I say, the members have already seen it. I will read it for the benefit of the public. First thing, the committee agrees that the council should develop a policy for protection of its green spaces. Number one. Recommends the portfolio holder that option 3 of paragraph 6.1 is implemented. And we recommend that category C, which seems to be a bit of a sticking point with everybody here, is split into two parts to form 3.1, category C, those with the following criteria, and this is green spaces, have a green space park or playing field designation, and, second point, are at least 1.2 hectares in size, and this is considered to be the minimum size necessary for use on a flexible basis for a range of informal recreational facilities as identified in the Green Infrastructure Strategy, and those that are of designated heritage value. In other words, on Hampshire County Council's Register of Historic Parks and Gardens and or within a conservation area, and where a special status has been afforded, such as to celebrate the millennium or it commemorates a king or queen's jubilee, or are of a designated nature conservation value.
Sites of special scientific interest, good old EU. Sites of importance for nature conservation, sinks. We've got one that we discovered 2 years after it was designated in Chinham, but that includes Old Down. Or local nature reserves, of which we heard quite a bit about. And category D sites are all other sites. So I think we've captured everything in there in A, B, and C, and then an added category D that doesn't qualify for the others. We also recommend from this committee that for categories A, B, and C, that the decision should be referred to full council. 5, recommends that for category D, the decision-making process should not be changed to maintain flexibility. Now, I think that ensures that everything goes to full council. We've been talking a little bit with development. I'd like to think I can speak a little bit on that. Unless the landowner promotes a piece of land that it owns and controls, which is also the subject of this particular paper, it won't get. Thank you, Councillor Keating. I think this is important enough to allow me a little flexibility, as I asked the Chair first thing. Is that unless something's put forward for development by the landowner, in this case the Borough Council, it won't be developed on. That's a simple fact. If it's promoted by the council for development, believe you me, it's going to go to full council, because I'll take it there myself. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. So are you putting that motion now?
I'm
Putting it forward now.
putting that motion now.
Do we have a second of that motion? Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. Do we have anyone to debate that motion? Right. So we've got Councillor Keating, Councillor James and Councillor Bierman already on the list. So if you'd like to address yourselves to the motion, the first one is Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I too feel it's very important, and it's very important we get it right, and we get it right tonight. I'm very concerned about referencing the motion to Old Down, because I have here the Cabinet member's decision that was published last night, which says to support the principle of designating Old Down as a local nature reserve, but it says agree that that designation will not be pursued until the lighting requirements and additional facilities, 106 money, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all, and in relation to the emerging local plan. The local plan is years away at the moment. It's years away. So you're suggesting in your motion that there's protection for Old Down. I believe that the Cabinet member's decision last night is not protecting it. Can I also say, Chair, the intention of the motion was to protect that which we currently have and to use relatively reasonable criteria to identify them. And therefore, when we build wherever next, that if they did design the park or introduce the park, that that park should also acquire protection. I don't see any reason whatsoever for a list divided into 3 parts when you can have one list. If we have one list, then we have a list which says not only will the War Memorial Park be protected, but it also says Old Down will be protected. That's what the intention is. We design the policy. And anybody who says we'll design the policy and use someone else's criteria, Hampshire County Council's, Heritage Register, etc., is crazy. We can't control what they say or do. They could take a park off their heritage list in 2 seconds flat. So we should not be applying or relying on someone else's criteria. We're the Borough Council, we're talking about the borough, and we should be saying there is one list, there is no category, and Old Down is on that list. That's what we should be saying, and that's what we should be saying tonight. Now, therefore, Therefore, Chair, if I may, paragraph 3 of your motion is totally unnecessary, and paragraph 3.2 is also necessary because it talks about a subsection of C. I believe that the motion essentially says, or intended to say, that we have one list. They call it A, B, and C. I call it list A, not list A, and we should protect them. Now, there is no good reason I've heard of tonight which says we shouldn't protect all these places. There is no good reason that I've heard tonight that says we should have more than one list. There is no good reason why anybody should say we should rely on someone else's definition or someone else's list. We should have our own list. We should protect that which we, the people of Basingstoke, need protecting and deserve protecting. And the people of Basingstoke should be the monitor. Thank you. So at the end of the debate, Chair, before you move the motion, I intend to offer an amendment to the motion.
Thank
But
you.
I listen to the debate first, of course.
Thanks. Thanks, Councillor Keating. I think there was an officer comment. I think, Councillor Miller, you wanted to come back? No, you're fine. All right, just the officer comment then. Thank you.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I just make it quite clear to committee the criteria which officers have put forward, and equally the motion which Councillor Miller has put forward there, under because of its sink designation, Old Down would be categorised if you adopted the officer approach, or if you agreed to adopt the motion put forward by Councillor Miller. So it would receive a protection because it's sink designation, irrespective of whether any LNR designation applied today or in future.
Thank you. Councillor Peach. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I need to apologise to the officer because I was one of those who failed to submit local sites for his consideration, and I shall do so as you've invited us to do belatedly. The motion. I don't think anybody could have a problem with point 1. And indeed, I was minded on reading the papers to suggest we did go forward with option 3. So, I'm sympathetic to that. It's then when we start getting into pulling it apart that I have some difficulties. And I'm a little surprised that Councillor Miller is totally enthusiastic about this, because, despite he's put it forward, because we currently have what I think is probably at this stage a lost cause, but within our own ward we have a situation where a developer wishes to drive a road through some open space. And the portfolio holder is minded. I think he might have made the decision by now, but certainly has given every indication that in order to facilitate housing beyond this open space, he's happy to see the road. Well, not happy. He said, "Oh, it's a big shame, and I'm crying about it." But the road will, in his view, bring greater benefits than the loss of the open space, and that's down to a portfolio holder to decide. And as far as I can interpret what's on this motion, that sort of incidental decision could happen elsewhere. And I have to say, what amazed me when I read this report, what was in category C. And, whatever people might think about the categories have been put forward, and I think, despite all the things that have been said, hierarchy appears in it. In fact, the word has been used several times and then withdrawn. It is about a hierarchy. And how one can have at the bottom of that hierarchy places like Glebe Gardens and Southview Cemetery, it just leaves me speechless. I speak as somebody, forgive me for the old downers, I don't know it in massive detail. I know the generalities, but I certainly know Southview Cemetery, and that could finish up in category C appalls me. And if that can happen to Southview Cemetery with all its history and all that goes with it, then we've not got very much protection. I can't see what the problem is in just having, as has been said by others basically, a list that says these are protected, and if you want to do something with it, and nothing is forever, if you want to do something with it, you've got to come to the full council with a massively convincing case for doing something else. But until that happens, in other words, the protection is on the green space or whatever it is, rather than the protection being on other possibilities at a later date, which is the way we seem to be angled at the moment. So I can't support this motion as it stands in its completeness. I have no problem with supporting 1 and 2 because I don't see what harm that does, certainly not 1. But I certainly can't support the motion as it stands. So I will be voting against it unless somebody comes up with a phenomenal amendment to change it to make it work.
Thank you, Councillor Bierman. Councillor James.
I too won't be supporting the motion. I think it's exceptionally confusing. I mean, the paper itself before us tonight is confusing and is not easy to understand, but this recommendation goes even further and confuses us even further. With maybe all good intention, I don't think it actually affords you the protection that you want to give to open space. And we've adding another category. I can see us adding another 2 categories, and it's crazy. It's a crazy recommendation, and I think the spirit of the motion was that we need to place value on open space. I don't think that this motion does that, and I think it will leave sites that we all value in this borough vulnerable, and I urge you not to support this motion because of that. I think if you look at the paper in relation to 7.11, it talks about in the conclusion that it's considered the council-owned green space within the borough are already afforded a sufficient degree of protection. I don't think it is. I don't think that is the case, and that's why we brought forward this motion. We've been consistently, as a Labour group, concerned about protecting open space. This motion before you doesn't give you that protection, and it says that considering each case on its merit has worked well in the past. Well, it hasn't worked well in the past. We've lost valuable pieces of open space that nobody wants to lose. Now, this motion before you tonight will not. I'm looking at conclusion 11 point on the report, so page 38 of 49. I think this motion before you does not give you that protection. And it goes on in the conclusion, as a range of factors are taken into consideration and a balanced view can be reached on whether to develop. And we've had the question from Councillor Peach earlier on is about whether, in relation to planning, the protection would be there for these sites. I don't think it would, because what we see is a developer will come forward and it will say in relation to development they can't deliver the affordable housing, but if in relation to viability, and viability in planning terms is a consideration now. And I don't think that this motion in relation to open space, and if you look at what your decision notice is in relation to Old Down, and it talks about 106 contributions. Now, if there is a shortfall of 106 contributions, Beggarwood and Old Down will not be protected. Therefore, this motion is not going to achieve that. Please withdraw it and let's not go down that route.
Thank you. Councillor Peach.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one small comment in terms of the motion. When people are saying that it, by putting forward this motion, it offers absolutely no level of protection whatsoever. But at the moment, what we're suggesting is what you were just saying is that the cabinet member gets to make a decision, whereas, and indeed the report suggested that sites previously assessed, it's always worked quite well. But this motion says that we would refer decisions to full council. So that to me offers a certain level of protection if you agree to the motion, because any site that comes forward, whether we agree with it or not, be debated at full council and we could make that decision there and then whether to kick it out or to accept it. And I thought that was kind of the whole point of what we wanted to take back control. I know you wanted the list, and I don't disagree with that. It's not what I'm saying. This also identifies that, but it does give us the ability to put any decision to full council.
Thank you, Councillor Peach. Councillor Keating, were you amending the motion?
Yeah.
Would you like to propose that?
Thank you, Chair. Those of you that have read the original motion, and it's replicated in the first part of this report, will see that I tend to go for simplicity. And everyone else goes for bloody complication. This report creates categories which we don't need. Point number one. It creates categories that we don't need, and it suggests that if you're not in category A, you're of a lesser value than category B, and it suggests that if you're not in category C, you're of a lesser value. I'm not saying it says that explicitly, but anybody who goes number one, number two, number three, number one is more important than two and three. The reality is, we don't need any categories. That's the first point. So I would amend the third point of the proposal to recommends that there be one list. Very simple. Right? That. All other words removed. Then subsection of that, which, i.e. there's one list now, so there are no categories. So you don't need section 3 at all, because it talks about categories. Remove the category. Remove section 3.1 and 3.2. Now, section 3.2 actually talks about a subsection of C. So if you only have one list, you don't have any categories, then there's no subcategory of C. So you remove 3.2. Then, simply to vary the item under 4, because we've got no categories, we've got a list, recommend that variation to the list be the decision of full council. Right? And then, because paragraph 5 says, again, they talked about subcategories, that we got rid of them, so you don't have paragraph 5. So you have a very simple proposed amendment. And if you want a copy of that, I'll give it to you.
Councillor Keating,
Sorry.
just for clarification, the list you're referring to,
The list
which list?
in the report.
So you're talking about the list of spaces in the appendix?
Categories A, B, and C contain different variables. Right? You put them all into one list, so you don't have an A, B, and C. Right? So it's not that difficult. You write Stratton Park once, you write all down once. It's done. It's not complex.
Councillor Beerman.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're talking about an amendment of amendment, which is a bit iffy, but putting that aside, I think I'd just like clarification from the officers that I would be right to suggest that whilst what Councillor Peach said a few moments ago is persuasive, at the end of the day, it isn't relevant because full council doesn't have jurisdiction over land sales. That's a cabinet issue, and the full council doesn't have any say in that. So unless it's strategic land, so I think that safeguard that is being implied doesn't really exist.
Thank you, Councillor, for that comment. I mean, certainly, currently, decisions about land disposal, you're right in saying, are taken by the cabinet member. And if the desire was that decisions about disposal on areas which were subsequently referred to full council were taken by full council, clearly that would require an amendment to the powers which are delegated to the portfolio, and that would obviously is why obviously. Would you mind? Sorry, Mike, explain a bit further. Sorry.
Basically, in December 2008, full council came up with a disposal procedure, and that's currently what we follow. and that's also tied in with the sort of the delegated authorities. So if you want to change the route in terms of where the decision making is, it would require a revision to that in due course, yes. Standing order, certainly. Yes, because the delegation goes to the Constitution, so yes, in certain types, yeah, yes. So at the moment, what happens is, depending on the nature, and it's quite convoluted, the disposal procedure, and literally every time we have, anything, I always work through it step by step. But it does delegate to cabinet or to the portfolio holders. You would need to sort of look again at that part of it.
We've gone away from questions to officers. We've gone through a motion being proposed and discussion taking place. I do not believe that officers have a role to play at this point.
It was a question from Councillor Bierman. Thank you, Councillor Keating. Councillor Miller, do you accept the amendment to your original motion?
Thank you, Chair. Basically, no, because there's a fundamental difference about putting down a list of particular sites. It's like putting down a list of your car collection, and that's what's going to be insured. Then next week you buy a new one, then you've got to change the insurance policy. That's what we're getting to if you identify a list. And the only body has been suggested to amend that list is full council. We could be here for every council meeting. There's another little parcel we want to add to the list. That's very unwieldy. If you apply the criteria that offer the protection as described by Richard earlier on, and it should have been enough, I would have thought, for members to feel assured that that protection is afforded. That is the advice coming from one of the professionals of the borough, and why I stuck to this criteria. It can apply to every site we want to protect. That means that if ever there's an application for a site or the borough takes a decision, it has to apply to this criteria. If this criteria meets the site, it doesn't get put forward, it's protected. And that's the reason why I stick to the criteria in this particular motion. I'm trying to keep it simple.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you. In which case, I will take a vote on the original motion, and then we will come back. With great respect, Councillor, the information I've been given from officers is we take the original motion and then we vote separately on the amendment. That's the advice I've been given by officers.
I really do want to record my objection to you creating new rules minute by minute. In any process, you take a motion, then you take an amendment, you vote on the amendment, and if the amendment is won, then you vote on the substantive motion. Them's the rules. You can't just make them up.
With the greatest respect, Councillor Keating, I am not making anything up. I am taking my advice from the officers. This is advice I've received. Yes, if for clarification, the officer will speak.
Well, in which case, I want my objection recorded.
Of course, thank you.
Happy to record your objection, but the advice we've had from our head of legal is that if a motion is tabled and an amendment is then tabled to that motion, it has to be accepted by the original proposer. If it isn't accepted, you then vote on the original motion and take the amendment as a separate item. I appreciate that, and as I've said, we'll note your objection, but that's the process we've been asked to follow.
Councillor Keating, thank you. We have to go with the advice we've been given, so I'll take the first motion and then I'll come back and take your amendment. So, if we could have a vote, please. The motion's been put, it's been seconded.
Clarification. Fine. Are you saying that we're going to vote on the motion that's been submitted belatedly tonight, and then if that's passed, well then that's passed, there's no point in amending it? Or is it only if that's lost that we then look at the amendment? Because I'm not understanding that quite.
Even if the original motion is passed, we can still hear the amended motion and vote on that too.
Thank you. As I've said, we can only go with the legal advice we've been given, members. So that's the advice we have.
Sorry, the points that you've raised will have written answers provided to you.
I'm asking for the legal advice that you propose and we're now operating to is put in writing. Now I'm going to copy, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a further point? I'm sorry to be unhelpful, Chair, but I am trying to be helpful, believe it or not. If it's found that the process was wrong, can I assume that the conclusion of the process will be revisited because it went through the wrong procedure?
I'll ask the officer to answer that.
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, so I'd have to take that under advisement.
I'm sorry to poke my nose in, but I actually think that the amendment should be taken first, and then, if that's lost, to go back to the original.
Are you suggesting, Councillor, that I go against the legal advice that we've received from the officers?
I'd be wrong to say that, but I'm saying to you, when I was mayor, and I'm sure Councillor Bierman would say this, that we were always told that you took the amendment first and then you went back to the original. Now, that's all I'm saying. I'm not telling you what to do.
I fully understand that, but I just feel I have to go with the legal advice we've been given. If it's wrong, obviously we can revisit it, but we have to go with the advice we've been given. So I will put the motion as stands. If we can have order, please. I'll put the motion as originally proposed by Councillor Miller. Those in favour of the original motion, please. Thank you. Those against? This is against. This is against.
The original motion against.
We'll have to just have a few minutes for the officer to check that, Councillor James. So, if anyone wants to take a comfort break at this moment. Members, can we return in about 5 minutes? Give the officers a chance just to check everything. So if we say we'll be back here 5 minutes from now. Yeah. Thank you, members. Thank you. If we can take our seats. We do unfortunately have to move standing orders, despite everything. Would anyone like to move standing orders? Thank you. Hopefully 5 minutes. There's been some debate during the break, and Councillor Miller has come up with what he hopes and what we would hope would be a compromise motion that we can agree as a committee, so that we can go forward on this and actually take this forward, hopefully, as a recommendation from this committee. So if I just ask Councillor Miller.
Point of order. We have a motion that has been voted on. We also have the 2/5 rule that's been voted on. I don't think the chair can amend that. That's been voted on, and it's automatic. It's stand. Yeah, it's stand.
Can I just refer to the officer for a moment?
You're absolutely right in what you're saying, but the chair is attempting to try and move this very important issue, which there does seem to be some consensus on, forward this evening. So she was begging the committee's permission, basically, to hear an alternative motion so that you could decide whether you wanted to vote on that, reach consensus and take it forward. If not, you're right, we're left in the position we were, that a resolution has already been reached and the 2/5 rule has been invoked.
But I think we can all obviously talk about points of order, but I think most of us are pretty much in agreement on where we want to go with this, and it would be very, very good, I think, for the benefit of the council, the committee, and for the public who've come back for another very long evening, if we could actually put forward a motion that we could all agree on without actually going away without achieving something tonight. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Chair. I believe, with the not wholehearted support of the members, it was said that we would have the full motion and then consider amendments to the motion. And I believe Councillor Keating put forward an amendment, and even though I don't believe it will hold, because I think it is irregular and wrong, but since we've set ourselves on that path, I think it would be only fair now, having taken the main motion, and you did agree that Councillor Keating could put his amendment, that he does that first, and then we'll see what's left after that, perhaps.
I'm in the hands of the committee here, Councillor Bierman. I'm just trying to reach some sort of compromise that we can all... Yes, that's fine. We'll go with that. Okay, so Councillor Keating, do you want to put your amendment?
Thank you, Chair. The amendment is to the original motion as proposed by Councillor Miller, and it had 5 parts within it. Part number 1, I agree with. That the Council should develop a policy for the protection of its green spaces. Part number 2 recommends that the PH, what's that? Portfolio holder, that option 3 of 6 is implemented. Option 3 in this case is on page 35 of 49, item 3 under 6.1. I'm reading this out specifically so that the officers can record it properly. Okay? So that's the second part of the motion. The third part of the motion has a number of variations in it, and line 1 should be recommends that remove category, recommends that there be one list. Very simple, very clear, and that means if you agree option 1, if you agree in line 3 there be one list, then the categories referred to in the next line, next paragraph, 3.1 and 3.2 would be eliminated. You understand? I'm just checking. I don't want you to be misunderstanding me. Right? The fourth item is recommends that variations of the list be the decision of full council and adopting and changing standing orders under Constitution accordingly. See? I can learn. Okay? And that's it. And that's it. Right?
So I just wanted to talk to that and just to clear for you all in doing that in relation to option 3 is that 6.2, and I just want to be clear of that, it goes on in 6.2 to say to avoid this, it goes on about the categorisation, and if we don't have categorisation now, we need to amend some of the wording within this report, otherwise we're vulnerable.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the officers can do.
We need a new report, don't we?
Because it really, in a sense, I'd like to support the amendments, but in a sense, I have concerns because what the report is saying, and it refers to categorisation. So I think the original motion stands, and I don't think we can do that, because if we do it, in a sense, we're vulnerable.
Thank you. I would expect the officers to be able to make adjustments to the rest of the wording to suit the main purpose of the motion. And I wouldn't have thought there was a problem with that. We don't have to accept it word for word. We can accept it with drafting amendments to suit the purpose of the main motion.
Yes, I would have thought so. Councillor Miller.
We're getting there, Sean. Thank you, Chair. No, I've got a very short suggestion here. Councillor James, I wholly agree with you. The rest of the text has got to be changed. Quite simple. You take out any references to category. Category wherever, and it goes through 7, 8. Well, really, it's from the options analysis. Anyway, but I still feel quite strongly that we've got to mention the criteria. Agree with your list, but you've got to choose a list against criteria. You've got to identify that, because anybody coming cold to this outside this committee must be able to relate the sites to criteria. And I agree, you take out the categories in the motion, no references to categories, and recommends that the list is determined from the following criteria, and keep the criteria in there. That would be my only change. And we're achieving the goal of a list, but a list has to be developed from something. Unless you identify the criteria, the list is baseless. That would be my suggestion, Chair.
Chair, I have no problem with the suggestion that one has criteria. I'm just not happy that these criteria sort of being hacked around sort of at nearly 10 o'clock without prior consideration can be just accepted as being the right criteria. I think it's quite reasonable to say there must be criteria, as there must for anything, but I'm not willing personally to support this list of criteria as they stand without prior consideration.
Councillor Keating. Councillor Keating, do you have anything to add to what's already been said? Do you want to tweak your amendment at all, or are you happy with it as it stands, or are you happy with the suggestion put forward by Councillor Miller?
I agree with both Councillor Miller and Councillor Bierman. Yes, there has to be criteria. It would be daft to have this without criteria. But I do agree with Councillor Bierman in that we don't have the criteria now. It's too late to develop criteria at this time of the evening, and therefore I can't accept what Councillor Miller is saying for tonight.
No. Okay, it has now. It has now. Right, so can we put that to the vote? It's Councillor Keating's amendment. Do we need that read out again?
Can I just come in? Sorry.
Bear with us 1 second.
Even with what you're proposing, we would still be in a position of a list with no criteria.
There's not a problem with somebody bringing forward criteria to. I mean, this isn't the final thing. It's got to go to cabinet. Criteria can still be submitted as a safeguard because one needs criteria. We're all agreed on that, I think, in principle.
So are you suggesting an amended report from the officers then, or how are we going to reach that
Well,
criteria?
I believe Mr. Wareham said a couple of times he is preparing a further report to go to cabinet, and the need for some criteria can be recognised in that. And ideally, those criteria should be put to us, but I don't know whether time permits that. But there must be some mechanism to allow criteria to be introduced, not just these tonight at short notice without proper and thoughtful consideration.
The construction of the report that you have before you tonight with the options was a form of criteria which you as a committee have said isn't acceptable because you want a list. So I'm not sure how the officer is now going to amend that into a list of criteria before it goes to cabinet.
Councillor Keating.
My suggested and proposed way forward is that we go away, we ask the officers, and they're very experienced, that they develop a process which says this is the criteria which will be applied to this list and be brought back here. We can rubber stamp it, or we can argue about it, or we can negotiate it, or we could debate it. But it means that there's no final decision made tonight, but we're 95% of the way there. And that would allow us to conclude the matter relatively simply by having another meeting. It could be a simple meeting just for that purpose, which would be that really. But that's my suggestion. It would mean that we would be operating in accordance with the standards the policy developed here recommended to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you.
One final thing. Two things occur to me is this is a reconvened meeting. We should be having a further meeting fairly soon.
Yes, we are.
That being the case, that gives us the opportunity to look at the criteria quickly. And anyway, we've waited so long, as Councillor Keating has said several times quite rightly, it's been batting along. It's worth waiting another couple of months or weeks or whatever it is to get it right, rather than to have something that we're going to regret. And anyway, I rather suspect at the end of the day, we'll have to go put it to the next meeting anyway, because our process has been wrong, and I'm pretty sure about that. So we'll have to revisit it for that reason alone, I suspect.
The next meeting's on the 21st. Let me just check with the officers will be on. The officers are saying that it would have to be the January meeting. They couldn't bring it back before then. It's not enough time to erect on the 21st. Call the meeting in December. On the 21st? Yes, no, the officers say they can't prepare the report in the 2 weeks that's left before the 21st. Let me ask the officer to respond to that, Councillor Keating. Councillors, the officers say they cannot produce amended criteria by the 21st. So, January. Alright, so are we happy with that as a committee? But there is...
Can I just confirm that this next meeting is not a continuation of this meeting? Okay, thank you.
The 21st is separate, different agenda from this. So we're saying that we want this, thank you committee, we say that we want this brought back in January with amended criteria. With the criteria for the list. Right.
So just to clarify, we're agreeing that there'll be a list.
No, we've agreed all of that.
Yes. Including a list.
The next meeting will have the criteria to attach to it.
Yes. And on the 16th of January, officers will bring some suggested criteria for members' comments in order to construct the list. Thank you.
Is everybody happy with that then?
Sure that there's no misunderstanding. That's the standing orders and constitutions.
Yes. Councillor Bierman. Thank you very much, Councillor Bierman. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yes. Right, can I just ask the officers just to completely clarify the position for the committee before we actually close?
Right, so we've agreed that the council should develop a policy for protection of its green spaces. We've agreed that the portfolio holder implement option. Is that bit? Sorry, but you've left it on here. Okay, that's fine. We've agreed that there'll be one list. We've agreed that there should recommendations go to full council where there's variation to that list, and standing orders need to be amended. And we've agreed that the criteria on which the list will be constructed come back to this committee for consideration on the 16th of January. Oh, is that what that says? Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. I think we're done. Thank you very much, committee. Thank you.